right into this NASCAR review for Cheez-It, what's it called? 335. Some magical number. Just call it a 90. No one cares. But anyway, for the most part, this was a good set of races. It was only the Nationwide Series and the Sprint Cup Series. There was no trucks this weekend. But, I don't know what the trucks were going to do. Do the trucks run road course races often? I don't know. But anyway, of course, this entire weekend was overshadowed by the fact that Tony Stewart has killed someone. I really don't want to talk too much about that because they went way, way in depth during the actual race, and if you saw that, you've already heard all you should need. And if you haven't, then just waltz on down to NASCAR.com because the entire front page is just littered with Tony Stewart. So, my opinion, the same as Dale Jarrett's. It took me a while to come to terms with the fact that it was the best option for him to sit out of the race. But when he started explaining how much this would psychologically affect Stewart during the race, I agreed at that point. Yes, it's a good idea for Stewart to sit out. However, done. So anyway, the Nationwide race. It was There wasn't really much that could have been done about that. I mean, while a road course race, it was, of course, get the sprint out of Nationwide as always, because it's just never gonna happen. I don't even need to bring up the results screen to know exactly what it was. Here, let me tell you. These drivers were in the top 5. Matt Kenseth, Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, Regan Smith. And this doesn't even count the race winner, Marcos Ambrose. And they were all in the top 5. As for the other drivers like Menard, the other subpar drivers like Menard, and Menard is the only one that really comes to mind, Sadler, all those Sprint Cup drivers. Ow. Please. And, like, the commentary people were like, oh, this is such a big win for Richard Petty Motorsports. It's like, you're surprised? He brought a Sprint Cup caliber car and a Sprint Cup caliber driver into the Nationwide Series on a road course, no less, with an experienced road course racing driver. And he won? Amazing! Who could have anticipated that? Not to mention he had the literal Sprint Cup pit crew pitting his car. It was the Sprint Cup race without Sprint Cup car drivers. Or the Sprint Cup cars. But it may as well have been a Sprint Cup car. I mean, honestly, he could have taken that 09 in the Nationwide Series and put it into the Sprint Cup race. It probably still would have finished well. So I don't know, not a big win for Mr. Petty Motorsports. But apart from that, it was a meh race. Not so much excitement at the end. I mean, it's hard to live up to a race like the Sprint Cup race that we just saw. Now, that was good racing. Especially for a road course, where up until lately, haven't been that exactly exciting of places to go. Now, think Watkins Glen in the past. 1990 J.D. McDuffie crash. The 2001 Jimmy Johnson Busch Series crash. Up until recently, up until at least the Car of Tomorrow, the Watkins Glen races have been pretty tame. But something happened with the Car of Tomorrow that caused super speedway caliber crashes almost racely on a racely basis. Was it 2008 that Hornish hit into the pit wall thing like Hamlin did today, except way, 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 way harder and made a way, way, way bigger explosion? Was it 2010, was it? With the Jeff Gordon incident and Hornish again. Hornish hasn't exactly been the greatest of drivers, as you can see, but Then in 2011, the Was Rudiman in the... It must have been Rudiman. It was David Reagan in a 6, and it must have been Rudiman in a 00. That was a super speedway caliber crash. And now, again. This time it was Ryan Newman and Michael McDowell. Sucks for Michael McDowell. Ryan Newman, you anticipate him wrecking every weekend, some way, somehow. It's gonna happen. That's just Ryan Newman's luck. But McDowell, sucks for him. What else? There was the red flag, the combined red flag times for today's race, totaling about 1 hour and 45 minutes. That should have been the length of the actual race, but gotta do what you gotta do. But it really sucks. But the predicted time was like a half an hour for the first repair, and then it took 1 hour and 21 minutes. If you're gonna tell us how long it's gonna take, at least be realistic. Because then I just actually tuned in for the whole broadcast as a result. But that might actually be their thing behind that, but oh man, this is going to be such a long review. There's so much to talk about. Kyle Busch's day. That was amazing. Constantly crap happening. That was good. Coming from someone who's despised Kyle Busch from the start, now that was a good race. Then Jeff Gordon lost power. You know, when Jeff Gordon was the only person to surpass Marco Zambros in qualifying, it stopped becoming Marco Zambros' race. It was now Jeff Gordon's race. And the only way that Marco Zambros was going to win is if something happened to Jeff Gordon, which is what happened. And from that point it became Marcos' race to lose. And then that one pit stop that got AJ Allmendinger up to the front, if he'd been able to keep Allmendinger to the outside and restart on the inside and keep Allmendinger on the outside, then Allmendinger probably would have dropped and he probably wouldn't have won the race. What else? There was plenty to talk about. Why am I thinking so hard on this? When it was coming down to those final restarts, several final restarts, it became a question of who was going to get the advantage right at the start of the restart. And a couple times there, it looked like Allmendinger was holding back intentionally. And as you know, as we should all know by now, because that's all they ever talk about during the restarts, is that the new restart rules don't allow that. They'll allow the person that's restarting in second and doesn't have control, you know, to be able to be in front of the leader when they come to the line. But if someone's intentionally holding back, they can like review all the footage and then say, you held back? You held back, penalty! And a couple of times there it looks like they were crap, but as Marco Zambros said when he got out of the car, it didn't matter in the end because he always ended up right next to Allmendinger off the turn anyway, so it's just a thing at that point. And when Larson was up there in the late race, I was rooting for Larson the whole time. I didn't care about Ambrose, I didn't care about Allmendinger. I was going for Larson. And for a while, it looked like that Ambrose and Allmendinger were going to wreck eventually. And Kurt Busch and Carl Edwards were the only ones between the two leaders and Larson. And Larson got past Edwards at one point. And, you know, if Ambrose and Allmendinger did get caught up and collected Kurt, Larson would have went on to win that race. That really sucks that he didn't. But those last 10 races made up for the red flag. That was good. And that's coming from someone who can't stand the road course races. This was the lowest race, and actually Sonoma's my lowest in race priorities because of the wrecks that happened at Watkins Glen. I like to tune into Glen because of those wrecks. Sonoma's just drop dead boring. It's just not a good racetrack. But Watkins Glen can get some action as you saw, and get some wrecks, as we saw again. So, am I happy with the result? Of course not. I don't like Allmendinger. I've never liked Allmendinger. From the start, I didn't care about him. I was inclined to not like him because of some of the stuff that he did. But until he was busted for substance abuse, that's when I started not liking him. And I don't care if he did drugs. That doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter if it was heroin, if it was crack, if it was PCP, if it was angel dust, What made me not like him is because they let Allmendinger back in, but didn't let Jeremy Mayfield back in. Mayfield was one of my go-to drivers if Martin wasn't doing good in a race back in 2004, 2005. I liked Mayfield. And then they kicked him out of the thing, and then... That's why I don't like Allmendinger. So if I had to have picked, it would have been Ambrose. But as always, Larson was there. I'm telling you, he's gonna win the season. There's no doubt about that. He's gotta win at some point. Chase Elliott can win in the Nationwide, then Larson can win in the Sprint Cup. Especially when Elliott's going against stuff like the 22 and the 54 on a weekly basis. Larson's got something. He's gotta get it. But, yeah. So, to not make this any longer, I'm just going to stop here and say there's 4 races until the chase. There's 4 people in the chase right now without wins. If we have 4 different winners these next 4 weeks, that'd be awesome. I think Larson's going to be one of them.